She took the bread from a dying girl just to keep her son alive. No one spoke after it happened. No one moved. The girl, no older than 12, had been coughing for days, lying in the corner of the shelter, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big. Her eyes had already faded. Her hand barely clutched the small crust left by her side. The mother waited until the last lantern flickered low. Shadows stretched across the walls like fingers. Her son had not moved all day, skin pale, breathing shallow, his lips dry and cracking. She reached across the silence, past the soldier snoring against the concrete, past the old woman muttering her dead husband's name, past the refugee girl who sat still as a statue. Her hand trembled when it touched the crust. The bread was damp, slightly moldy. It would be enough. She didn't look at the girl, not until the breath stopped. A single gasp escaped someone's throat, then nothing. Just the echo of water dripping from rusted pipes, and her son's faint moan as she placed the bread in his mouth. The next morning, the soldier shouted. Someone had taken the girl's bread. No one confessed. No one needed to. The mother sat against the wall, arms wrapped around her son, staring into the dark as if waiting for judgment to come. You're free to judge her, but first, hear the whole story. Before the bread, there was a garden. Before the bunker, there was a porch with sunflowers. Before the silence, there was music, and a boy who coughed in his sleep. Back then, she thought love could keep him safe, that warmth and care and stories whispered in the night could keep the world away. Back then, the sky was still blue, before it cracked open like bone, before everything collapsed, before the war made monsters of all the people who used to pray for peace. So if you want to hate her, wait. And if you want to understand, come back to the morning the radio went silent. Come back to the beginning. Before the sirens, there was the quiet. She used to wake before the sun, long before her son stirred beneath his pile of patched blankets. The mornings were slow, simmering tea, the creak of floorboards, the hum of an old transistor radio nestled in the windowsill. It only played one channel now, but the voices were kind. The house was small, barely 2 rooms, but the garden outside still clung to life. A few sprigs of basil, some stubborn potatoes, one violet blooming out of season. Her son, Jonah, was 6. His cough had started in the spring. It never left. The doctors said it might go away. They also said antibiotics were in short supply. She hadn't seen a real doctor in months. Still, she tried. She boiled ginger when she could find it. She soaked rags in vinegar. She read to him at night, fairy tales and fragments of forgotten stories. When the words dried up, she made up new ones. She didn't speak much to anyone else, not since the borders had closed, not since the neighbors had packed what they could and vanished. But there were still moments of sweetness. Jonah liked to draw. His favorite sketch was of her planting flowers on the roof, something that never happened. But he insisted it had. She let him believe it. The day the sirens came, the air felt different. She noticed it while hanging laundry. The wind shifted. Dogs barked in patterns she didn't recognize. Then the radio. At first, only static. Then, attention, this is a statewide emergency broadcast. All citizens north of Route 17, evacuate immediately. Hostile breach confirmed at sector line. She didn't finish folding the clothes. She wrapped Jonah in the heaviest coat she had. She checked the emergency bag she'd prepared, twice. Then again, batteries, water tablets, his drawings, a photo of his father, the scarf her mother made. She tried calling the nurse who lived at the end of the street. No answer. The air siren finally wailed just as she opened the front door. And standing there, barefoot and shivering, was a girl she didn't know. Maybe 12, maybe less. Behind her, a boy with flushed cheeks and sunken eyes. He couldn't have been older than 3. They didn't ask to come in, and she didn't ask them to explain. She stepped aside. "Get inside," she said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. Jonah reached for her hand. The girl stood silently. The boy whimpered, and somewhere in the distance, a city was burning. The days that followed felt like smoke, thick, sour, impossible to breathe. She kept the curtains drawn and the lights off, except for the candles she lit at night. The power had gone 2 days in, followed by the water. The pipes gave one final wheeze before falling silent. The girl never gave her name. She didn't speak much at all. She helped with Jonah, though, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, feeding him slow spoonfuls of soup. What little they had, they shared. The girl never ate much. Her brother, on the other hand, whimpered constantly, like the hunger was gnawing him from the inside. One night, the girl stood by the window for hours, watching the sky flicker orange. It looked like sunset, but there was no sun, just the city burning far beyond the horizon. That was the night the soldier came. She heard the knock, 3 short raps, followed by silence. She opened the door an inch and saw a young man in uniform, maybe 19, covered in ash. One hand clutched a broken radio. "Water," he croaked. "Do you have water?" She did. She let him in. He didn't say much, just sat in the corner and stared at the wall. Said the checkpoint had collapsed. Said civilians were no longer a priority. Said the broadcasts were only meant to keep people calm. The girl didn't trust him. She sat between her brother and the soldier all night, her hands clenched in fists. The next morning, the mother packed. Not everything, just what she could carry on her back. A few cans, a dull knife, a scarf, Jonah's drawings, the radio. She wrote his name on the inside of his coat collar in case they got separated. "Why?" he asked. She didn't answer. She only whispered, "If someone finds you, I want them to know who you are." She didn't cry, not even when they left the house and walked past the dead cat on the steps, not even when she turned back and saw their garden, half trampled, half frozen, glowing faintly in the early light. Jonah looked up at her. "Will we come back?" She paused. Her mouth opened, then closed. "I hope not," she finally said. They walked to the end of the street. There were no cars, only silence, the kind that stretches across whole cities. At the checkpoint, the guard didn't even look at their papers. He simply pointed to the tunnel. "Bunker access," he said. "No return." She gripped Jonah's hand tighter. The girl followed close behind, and beneath their feet, the world closed in. The tunnel breathed like something alive. It exhaled dampness, oil, and rot. The smell of rusted metal and old sweat. The air pressed in on them, thick and wet, with the kind of darkness that made people forget what daylight looked like. They descended past twisted railings and water-streaked concrete. The soldier said nothing, just motioned them forward, down toward the group shelter. There were already dozens inside, huddled against the walls, faces pale, shoulders drawn close, children curled into coats like nests. A woman sat rocking herself with her hands clasped over her ears. A man with a bandaged leg whispered prayers into a tin cup. The nurse found them first. Her name was Marta, and she had eyes like flint, Once a medic, always a medic. She walked with a limp, but moved like a blade, sharp, quick, unforgiving. "You have children?" she asked the mother. She nodded. "Then follow me." They were shown a patch of floor near the rear wall. No beds, just flattened cardboard and 2 thin blankets, already damp. The girl laid her brother down. The boy's skin burned. He coughed once, then again, deep, wet, shaking. Marta looked him over with a grim face. "He needs clean water and antibiotics. We have neither." That was the beginning of survival. Each day started the same. Someone turned on the battery-powered lamp for a few hours. People lined up for their daily ration, a third of a stale loaf and a cup of water that smelled faintly of iron. Some prayed, others just stared. Jonah wouldn't eat. His fever waxed and waned, but his strength drained faster each day. She gave him her portions, lied and said she'd already eaten. At night, she rubbed his hands to keep the color in them. He slept on her lap, breath ragged, dreams full of moaning and twitching limbs. The soldier changed too. Once polite, now quiet, sullen. He stopped making eye contact. One night, she saw him cry while cleaning his gun. Whispers began to rise. "Someone's taking extra water. Where did that second blanket come from? The soldier's hiding something." She kept her head down. Until the day the refugee boy collapsed. He stopped breathing sometime before dawn. The girl sat beside him, motionless, eyes dry, hands folded in her lap. No one said anything, not even Marta. It was the mother who finally moved, lifting the boy's tiny hand, closing his fingers around a piece of his sister's sketch, a drawing of him holding a balloon. No one asked for a burial. There was no place left to bury anything. That night, they slept in a bunker that felt smaller than ever. The air was thick with fear, grief, and hunger that reached beyond the stomach. She turned toward Jonah and whispered stories into his ear. She told him about trees and rain and the sound of wind in open fields. But as she spoke, she realized she couldn't remember what wind sounded like anymore. She wasn't sure he could either. The tunnel had no clocks, but they could all feel time. It settled into their bones like mold. Days began to blur, marked only by the sound of the soldier's cough or the rattle of Marta's steps. The rations grew smaller, the light dimmer. The mother no longer spoke much. Jonah's fever came and went, but never broke. He lay still most days, eyes half-lidded, lips cracked. He didn't draw anymore. His notebook sat folded under her coat, too sacred to open. The girl stayed close. She hardly left her brother's side, even after he passed. Some nights she would lie curled around the coat that had once wrapped him, whispering things into the darkness. No one listened. Everyone had their own ghosts. That week, something changed. A loaf appeared. Not part of the rations, not issued by Marta, just there, wrapped in wax paper, sitting quietly on the far table near the back generator. No one knew who it belonged to, but everyone knew who needed it. Whispers began again. "She doesn't speak, but she eats? She's just a child. That mother's boy will die either way." The mother said nothing. She sat beside Jonah, her hand resting on his. She stared at the loaf like it was a grenade, powerful enough to change everything, but likely to kill someone either way. Marta said, "We'll draw lots if no one claims it." But that never happened, because the refugee girl took it, quietly, wordlessly, not for herself, but for her sketchbook. She drew it. She drew the loaf, her brother, Jonah, the soldiers shaking hands, Marta's cracked glasses, a record like it mattered. That night, the girl curled into her corner, her sketchbook folded under her chest, and fell asleep. The mother watched. She watched her son's chest rise and fall, weak, fragile, fluttering like bird wings in a storm. Then, in the dark, she rose. She stepped over bodies, tiptoed past cracked crates and sleeping children. Her shadow stretched long across the bunker wall. She knelt by the girl. She lifted the sketchbook, slipped her fingers into the folds of the coat, and pulled out the loaf. It was still warm. She hesitated, just for a breath. Then she turned and returned to Jonah. She didn't wake him, just broke the bread into pieces and placed them on his lips. He stirred, ate, swallowed, and for the first time in days, slept without shivering. The next morning, the girl woke and found it gone. She didn't cry. She just drew another picture. This one of a hand taking something, but instead of anger, the girl used soft lines, gentle shading, like forgiveness in charcoal. Jonah smiled in his sleep, a rare thing. The mother sat with her back against the bunker wall, the crumb-stained cloth still in her lap. She should have felt relief, but it tasted like guilt. The refugee girl didn't speak of the bread. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than accusation. The rest of the shelter moved on, or pretended to. No one wanted another fight. The last one had left a man with a cracked rib and a child with blood on their shoes. But the tension remained. The soldier began to withdraw completely. He stopped attending ration lines, kept to himself in the shadows. His eyes were sunken now, his fingers twitching with something unspoken. Once, the mother saw him staring at the barrel of his gun for so long it looked like prayer. Marta wasn't doing much better. Her limp was worse. She barked orders when she could, but her voice cracked more than it used to. One night, she sat down beside the mother and said nothing for nearly an hour. When she finally spoke, it was just this: they don't send rescue for people like us. And then she stood, wiped her hands on her coat, and walked away. The mother began rationing hope. She no longer dreamed of escape, only of the next day. One more breath for Jonah, one more minute without the fever spiking. She began to understand something terrible. That love couldn't fix this. That kindness didn't guarantee survival. She started measuring people by how many days they had left in their eyes. Jonah's eyes, soft, distant, looked like weeks, not months. The refugee girls, still sharp, still burning. That's when the news came. A soldier, another one, pale and limping, stumbled into the tunnel with a bloodied arm and a cracked helmet. He carried a packet. Inside, 3 tickets, one for a child, one for an adult, one for a soldier. Only valid for the next extraction. Last one out. No exceptions, he croaked. The trucks aren't coming back. The shelter erupted. Marta screamed at people to stay calm. The soldier clutched his gun. Someone tried to grab the tickets. Someone else threatened fire. In the end, Marta took them. She looked at the mother, at Jonah, at the girl, and she said, "Decide? No ceremony, no shamna." Just the cold instruction of a woman who had run out of choices. That night, the mother stared at the tickets. They were real, crisp edges, dry ink, an official seal that seemed to laugh in her face. Jonah slept beside her, still warm, still sick, too sick. The girl sat across the room, sketching again, her brother's face, over and over, a memory she refused to let vanish. The mother looked at the tickets, at the bread wrapper she still kept in her pocket, at Jonah, and she began to cry, not loudly, but in the way you do when you realize you've reached the edge of the world. She cried until morning. Then she picked up a pen and began to write the letter. The letter was small, written on the back of a ration slip, the only paper she had left. She kept it hidden inside her coat, folded twice, pressed against her chest like a second heartbeat. She didn't begin with Dear Jonah. She didn't know if he'd ever read it. She didn't even know if he'd survive the night. Instead, she wrote, "If you're reading this, it means I made a choice." Outside, the tunnel was groaning, not from bombs this time, but from people. The murmurs hadn't stopped since the soldier announced the tickets. Marta had them locked in her chest, and every hour someone knocked on her metal door, pleading. Some offered money, some offered medicine, some offered themselves. But the nurse said the same thing to everyone: "I'll know who needs them when I see it." And the mother wondered, does anyone ever see the right thing in time? Jonah was failing. His breathing was slower now, his fingers curled inward. Even when she pressed the warm rag to his chest, he didn't stir. The soldier visited once more, gave her a nod, didn't speak, then left something in her hand, a forged identity slip. "If you're thinking about staying behind," he whispered, "don't." She stared at the fake name for a long time, and for a second, she imagined using it, imagined lifting Jonah onto her back, running through ash, climbing into the truck, feeling the wheels churn beneath them as the tunnel shrank into history. But she knew he wouldn't make it. He could barely breathe here, in the shelter. Out there, wind, snow, smoke, he'd be gone before they reached the checkpoint. She folded the slip and handed it back. "I can't save him," she said. The soldier blinked, then "Save yourself." But she wasn't listening anymore. That night, she sat beside the refugee girl. The girl didn't look up from her sketchbook. "I need your coat," the mother said softly. Still, no reaction. "I won't ask again." The girl looked up, eyes like knives dulled by loss. She handed the coat over. The mother slipped the child's ticket into the lining. She said nothing, not a word of warning, not an explanation. She just tucked the letter in behind it, then walked away. She spent the rest of the night holding Jonah's hand, stroking his hair, whispering old fairy tales, not the real versions, but the ones she had changed for him. The ones where no one ever died, only disappeared into forests and waited to be found. Just before dawn, she closed his eyes and kissed his forehead. And when the guards arrived for extraction, she pointed to the girl. "She's the one." The girl didn't understand until the soldier motioned her forward. She reached for her sketchbook, started to protest. But the mother turned her back and didn't turn around again. She didn't watch the truck leave, didn't want to see the girl looking back, or worse, not looking back. The echo of boots faded, the engine roared, then sputtered, then vanished. What remained was silence, and Jonah, he hadn't woken since the day before. His breath was thin, lips pale, arms curled close to his chest as though protecting something invisible. The mother sat beside him, fingers brushing his hair, whispering lullabies only half remembered. She told him about the sky and rivers and the dog they almost adopted. She told him about his father's crooked smile. She told him about the sound of wind chimes on the balcony. And somewhere in between, she began to forget what was real and what was only hope. Later that day, the bombing started again. It wasn't close, not at first. Just the distant thump of destruction, one building at a time. But then the second wave, louder, heavier, closer. Marta screamed for people to gather under the central archway. The soldier tried to fix the door hinges, but it was too late. The earth shook. Dust rained down. Screams filled the darkness. Then the ceiling cracked and fell. She woke beneath debris. Her leg was pinned. Her ears rang. Her mouth tasted of iron and ash. But she was alive. She tried to move. Couldn't. Tried again. Something shifted. Then Jonah. She crawled toward the last place she saw him. Felt through ash and stone. Her fingers brushed cloth, hair, a tiny hand. But it was cold. She stopped. There was no sound now. Only the faint ticking of her watch, still strapped to her wrist. The same one she used to time his medicine. She pressed her forehead to his and stayed there. Minutes? Hours? She didn't know. She didn't cry. There was nothing left in her to cry with. Eventually, she pulled herself out. The air above was sharp and cold, the world blanketed in snow and smoke. No one waited. No trucks, no soldiers, no voices. She walked, limping, bleeding, one hand clutched over her ribs. She walked past frozen trees, past abandoned boots, past a scarf tied to a fence post, blue and frayed, like the one Jonah used to wear. And she kept walking. She didn't know where she was going, only that it was away. From the girl she had saved, from the boy she hadn't, from the bunker, from herself, and into a silence where nothing could follow her. The snow fell in slow spirals, as if the world had grown tired of rushing toward death. She walked through it with no destination, no thought, just a hollow rhythm, one foot, then the other. Her limbs moved, but her mind stayed curled on the bunker floor beside Jonah's body. She passed burned-out cars, blackened trees, half-collapsed fences. The land looked like a dream someone had forgotten halfway through. Once, she stumbled across a suitcase lying open in the road. Inside, a child's shoe, a tin of powdered milk, a postcard that read, "Thinking of you, always." She didn't take anything. She just knelt and sat there until the snow covered her shoulders. She found a church, or what used to be one. The steeple had collapsed, but part of the nave remained. Stained glass shards glimmered across the floor, lit by pale gray light. She crawled inside and slept on a pew. That night, her dreams were silent. Jonah didn't speak. The world didn't end. Only the sound of wind filled her head, soft, steady, forgiving. When she woke, there was a child watching her, maybe 5, maybe 7, wrapped in rags, face smudged with soot, eyes round and silent, like someone who'd learned not to expect kindness. The child said nothing, just stood there. She blinked, reached slowly into her coat, pulled out a square of bread wrapped in fabric. It was the last of it. She offered it. The child didn't move, so she stepped forward, unwrapped it, broke it in half, held one piece out. Eventually, the child reached forward, took it, nibbled, sat down beside her. No questions, no name, no trust, just 2 warm mouths in a cold ruin. She didn't ask where the child came from, didn't need to. She wrapped them both in her coat. And for the first time since the trucks left, she spoke. "You'll be all right." It wasn't a promise, just a whisper into the void. Something to keep the ghosts quiet. That night, she unfolded the letter. The one she had written to Jonah. She read it aloud. To the snow, to the broken glass, to whatever remained of the world, and to the child asleep beside her. She stayed in the church for 3 days, or maybe it was 4. Time had softened into a blur. The child never spoke, only followed her in silence, like a shadow with small hands and hollow eyes. They ate what little she could find, crumbs in coat pockets, melted snow in rusted pans. She didn't ask for a name, didn't give hers. Names belonged to people who still had futures. She began to stitch torn pieces of cloth into a small pouch, one scrap from her scarf, another from Jonah's old sleeve. Inside, she placed the letter, folded tightly, tied it shut with thread. Not to keep it safe, but to keep it from falling apart. On the 5th day, they reached the field. It wasn't a real field anymore, just a wide patch of ash and frozen mud where trees used to grow. And beyond it, the husk of a transport station. Once, trains had stopped there, brought people in and out, families going home, soldiers going off. Now it was just a skeleton of steel, but someone had lit a fire. And around it, survivors? Not many, 7, maybe 8, mostly children. One elderly man whose coat was stitched with old war medals. They looked at her without words. She nodded, sat near the edge, pulled the child close. The man offered her a cup of water. She took it. No one asked anything. No one offered comfort. But they made space, and that was enough. That night, she opened her coat and showed the firelight the letter. The man read it slowly, his lips moving silently, his eyes never blinking. When he finished, he folded it, pressed it to his chest. "I had a daughter," he said. Then nothing more. The girl beside him held a broken doll. She watched the letter like it was made of fire. And maybe it was a fire that didn't warm, but remembered. She stayed the night, held the nameless child in her lap, dreamed of Jonah for the first time in days. In the dream, he smiled. No cough, no bunker, just blue sky and a garden full of violets. She woke with tears on her cheeks, but her hands were steady. She left the fire at dawn. The others were still asleep, curled like question marks around dying embers. The man had tucked the letter into his breast pocket as if it belonged there, as if it could replace something he'd lost long ago. She didn't take anything with her, not even food. Only the child. They walked in silence through a forest where most of the trees were blackened stumps. Wind whistled through charred branches. The sky was low and heavy, the color of old bruises. At one point, the child tugged at her sleeve and pointed. A house, or what remained of one, 3 walls, half a roof, and a door still standing like it was waiting for someone to come home. They stepped inside. The floor was cracked tile. Someone had once painted flowers on the wall, roses and sunbursts, now faded and scorched. In the corner, a crate. Inside it, a tattered coat, a glass bottle, and a child's drawing. The drawing showed a woman with long hair holding a child. Their hands were joined. Behind them, a tree with a ribbon tied around it. She stared at it for a long time. Then she reached into her pouch, took out Jonah's last drawing, creased and worn, but still intact. A picture of her, standing in the garden, sunlight pouring from a sky that never quite existed. She placed it beside the other. 2 mothers, 2 children, both still holding on. She stayed in that house for 2 nights, built a fire from broken chairs, boiled snow in a tin lid, sat on the floor and told the child stories, not fairy tales, but real ones. Of a boy named Jonah, of a refugee girl who never stopped drawing, of a soldier who cried in the dark and gave her a name that wasn't hers, and of a letter she wrote and could never take back. On the third morning, she tied a ribbon to a tree, a piece of her scarf, the one Jonah used to play with. She tied it high, where the wind could catch it. Then she whispered, "If anyone finds this, tell them, I was here, I tried, I loved someone once." The child stood beside her, reached up, touched the ribbon, then took her hand, and they walked away. By the time they reached the next outpost, her feet were bloodied. She didn't feel it, not anymore. Pain had become a background noise, constant, like the wind. The child still hadn't spoken, but they no longer hesitated to take her hand, no longer flinched at shadows or loud sounds. When she slowed, they waited. When she stumbled, they reached back without thinking. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was closeness. The outpost had been abandoned. Rust on the fences, a sign that read Civilian Relief Station, Zone 9, swinging in the wind, one corner bent like a snapped wing. Inside, cots were overturned. Walls were marked with chalk, names, numbers, arrows pointing nowhere. She searched every room, not for food, not for warmth, for something human. She found it in the back room. A notebook. Its pages were scorched, half gone, but what remained were sketches. Faces, hands, bread. A woman with long hair behind a glass window. A child screaming on the other side. Her breath caught. The drawing wasn't exact, but it was her. She remembered that moment. The day she took the bread, the day the girl watched, the day she became something she didn't recognize. The girl had drawn it, had carried the memory out with her, and now, years later, it had returned. She opened the notebook and placed Jonah's letter inside. Not hidden, not folded. Open, flat, visible. The words scarred into the page like confession. Maybe no one will forgive me. Maybe you won't. But if you ever become a parent, you'll understand. Sometimes love means turning away. She left it there, walked back outside. The child stood at the fence, watching the clouds. She knelt, pulled them close, and whispered, "I had a child once." The wind tugged at her coat. The cold seeped into her spine. But she didn't shiver. Not this time, because something had shifted. Not relief, not redemption, just recognition. She wasn't the same woman who entered the shelter. She wasn't a mother, not anymore. She was something else now. A witness, a scar that remembered warmth. The child finally spoke. It was barely a whisper, one word. "Why?" She didn't answer right away. They were sitting beneath a broken rail bridge. The sky cracked with winter light. Her coat was draped around the child, her back pressed to a slab of frozen concrete. She could have lied, could have said, "Because I'm strong," or "Because I had no choice." But the truth was heavier than that. "I wasn't brave," she finally said. "I was tired." The child stared, waiting. "I was tired of losing everything slowly, so I chose to lose it all at once." The child said nothing else, just leaned in closer. They walked again, past wrecked cars, a playground full of snow, a window with a teddy bear still propped on the sill. She picked up an old scarf from the roadside, blue, tattered, identical to Jonah's, wrapped it gently around the child's neck. "There," she said, "now the wind won't get in." The child smiled, not fully, but enough. And something inside her cracked, just a little. Not pain, not grief, just memory. They reached a river, frozen over. She cracked the surface with a stone and scooped water into her palms. The child drank, and then she saw something across the ice. A figure, a girl, nearly grown, standing alone, a sketchbook in her hands. She didn't wave, didn't speak. She simply opened the book and tore out a page, let it drift into the wind. The paper danced across the river like a bird that forgot how to land. She watched it fall into the snow at her feet. A drawing. Her face? Not exact, but close. Drawn in charcoal, her eyes full of fire and ash. Above them, a sentence. No one remembers her name, but I do. She looked up, but the girl was gone. Only the wind remained. Only the sound of breath and silence. She pressed the drawing to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." Not for the recognition, but for the remembering. The next morning, she woke to birdsong. Real birds. Not many, not loud, but there, fluttering in the rafters of a half-collapsed barn where she and the child had taken shelter. For a moment, she didn't move, just lay on the cold wood, eyes wide, listening. It felt impossible. She hadn't heard birds in weeks, maybe months. She looked at the child curled beside her. The scarf around their neck had slipped, revealing a faint scar, the shape of a crescent moon. She reached out, adjusted it gently, and whispered, "Still here." Not to the child, to herself. They walked again, not to escape, not toward rescue, just to keep moving, to keep breathing. The land began to soften, less ash, more trees. Once they came across a woman who offered them shelter for the night. A fireplace, a cup of soup, no questions. The woman stared at the child, then at her. "You two alone?" She nodded, but something in her eyes must have told more than her words. The woman gave her a wool blanket. "People like us," she said, "we're not made of flesh anymore. We're made of the ones we couldn't save." They found an old schoolhouse the next week. Inside, broken desks, snow-covered blackboards, a drawer full of old notebooks. She opened one. On the last page, a child had written in shaky letters, "I hope my mom finds this. I hope she's okay." She sat there for a long time, staring at the ink. Then she took out her letter to Jonah. The original was gone, left behind with the girl's sketchbook. But she remembered the words. She wrote them again. Not to cling, but to release. She tore out the page and pinned it to the wall. The child asked, "Is that your son?" She nodded. The child was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Did he get the letter?" She looked down. "No," she said, "but someone did." And that, somehow, was enough. Later that night, the child added their own drawing beside the letter. A woman with her hand on a child's shoulder. No names, no color, just outlines, filled in with charcoal and ash. Two shapes still standing, still walking, still choosing not to disappear. The snow never really melted, but spring still came, not in colors, but in the way the earth softened beneath their feet, in the way the wind lost its teeth, in the way she no longer felt like a ghost walking through the end of the world. She and the child reached the edge of a forest one morning, and for the first time in weeks, she saw sunlight flicker through the branches, not like fire, but like forgiveness. They sat beneath a tree, sharing a crust of bread. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. She opened her pouch, removed the copy of Jonah's letter, read it aloud one final time. My love, if you're reading this, maybe you're alive. That was all I ever wanted, even if I couldn't be there. I didn't abandon you. I just knew. If you came with me, you'd die. But if I left first, maybe you'd live. I wasn't strong enough to protect you, but I was clear enough not to fail again. Maybe no one will forgive me. Maybe you won't. But if you ever become a parent, you'll know. Sometimes, love means letting go. Love means turning away, so the other can survive. She folded it again, pressed it into a knot in the tree trunk, tucking it where bark met shadow, not to hide it, but to leave it behind. She no longer needed to carry it. She turned to the child. Their face was thinner now, but their eyes were clearer, stronger, like someone who had survived something they didn't have words for yet. She reached for their hand, held it gently, and in that moment, she understood something. She would never be forgiven, and she no longer needed to be. Because forgiveness wasn't the point, survival was. And memory, in a burned world, memory is the only inheritance left. The child reached into their pocket, pulled out a sketch they had made. Simple lines, quiet shapes, a woman in a scarf, a tree with a ribbon. They placed it beside the letter in the tree, then turned to her and said, "Let's go." She nodded, and together they walked into the trees. No names, no pasts, no absolution, just two figures moving forward. One because of loss, one because of what was left behind. If someone ever asks why she didn't choose her son, she'll say nothing. They wouldn't understand. But maybe, someday, the child beside her will. Maybe they'll remember the woman with the ribbon, the one who took the bread, the one who stayed behind. And maybe they'll whisper, "You did the right thing." Soft music begins. A child's laughter echoes, distant, maybe imagined. Snow falls gently through a clearing. A piece of blue fabric flutters on a branch. The camera fades. Only the ribbon remains. If this story stayed with you, even for a moment, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one. These aren't just stories. They're pieces of all of us. Would you have made the same choice? Let us know below, or just sit with the silence. Sometimes that's enough.